Hello and welcome to CSIS. I'm Myrna Gallick, Deputy Director and Senior Fellow with the Japan Chair. It is my pleasure to host this conversation on the recent leadership election for Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party. The contest to replace LDP leader Shigeru Ishiba, who resigned last month, took place on October 4th. In a historic step, Sanae Takaichi prevailed and became the first woman elected to lead the LDP. She will also likely become Japan's next prime minister later this month. To help us understand what happened, what's next for Japanese politics, and the potential implications for Japanese foreign policy, I am joined by two of my CSIS colleagues. Joining virtually is Dr. Kristi Govella, Senior Advisor and Japan Chair at CSIS, and an Associate Professor of Japanese Politics and International Relations at the University of Oxford. And here with me in the studio is Mr. Nick Szechenyi, Vice President of Geopolitics and Foreign Policy and a Senior Fellow with the Japan Chair here at CSIS. Let's start by setting the stage for Saturday's contest. Kristi, what precipitated this leadership election in the LDP?
So this election comes at a difficult time for the LDP and for Japan as a whole. Prime Minister Ishiba announced that he would resign last month after only a year in office. And during the past year, the LDP had suffered losses in both houses of the Japanese parliament, leaving it to rule in minority government for the first time in 70 years. So as you can see in the graphic, the LDP and its longtime coalition partner Komeito now have less than half the seats in both the upper house and the lower house, which means that they've been forced to negotiate with an increasingly vocal opposition to pass legislation, usually on an issue-to-issue basis. So, in particular, the rise of smaller populist conservative parties such as Sanseito and the Democratic Party for the People has attracted attention in recent months. So why did this happen? First, since before Ishiba's time in office, the LDP has been plagued by financial scandals that have caused an overall decline in support for the party over the last several years. And the LDP leadership has really been unable to fully repair the damage that this has done to public trust. Second, Japan is facing serious economic challenges, such as inflation and high prices for staples such as rice, that are really impacting average Japanese citizens whose wages have not increased. So this played a role in driving voters towards the opposition parties and heightening worries over issues such as immigration, for example. Increases in U.S. tariffs have also exacerbated these concerns. Third, the opposition has managed to capitalize on the LDP's weakness, particularly these newer conservative parties such as Sanseito, which drew away some of the LDP's traditional conservative voters with a focus on Japanese first agenda items while simultaneously attracting younger voters via social media. So it's a difficult situation for the LDP right now, but it's also important to note that the opposition as a whole is very divided and ideologically diverse. So they range from progressive to very conservative, and it's extremely unlikely that these disparate parties would be able to unite and put forward their own alternative candidate for prime minister, which is why this LDP leadership election is so important. Even though the LDP and Komeito are in a minority government position, Takaichi is still very likely to become the next prime minister of Japan later this month.
So breaking down the leadership race, there were 5 candidates in the running. Nick, can you tell us about them and how the LDP chose Takaichi?
Sure. Well, going quickly across the screen here from left to right, you had Shigeru Koizumi, who's the Minister of Agriculture in the current government. Next to him, Yoshimasa Hayashi, Chief Cabinet Secretary and a former foreign minister. Toshimitsu Motegi, a senior figure in the party who's held various posts and actually negotiated a trade agreement with the United States during the first Trump administration. Next to him is Kayuki Kobayashi, former Minister for Economic Security. He was very outspoken during the race on the need to increase defense spending to better defend the nation. And then Sanae Takaichi, a veteran lawmaker, conservative, who lost to Ishiba in the race last time, but as we already heard, prevailed on Saturday the 4th. So briefly, let's just go over the voting process. So each candidate had to get support from at least 20 of their counterparts in the Diet to run. There was a first round of voting, sort of a mix of legislators in the Diet from the LDP and rank and file party members from across the country. In the first round, you see on the screen 295 votes for each group. If neither candidate is able to secure a majority, in the first round, there's a runoff between the top two. And in the runoff, the prefectural chapters of the party get only one vote for each prefecture. So in the second round, the voting of the legislators has greater weight, and then the winner is elected. So let's just see what happened this time around. Orange is rank and file party members, and blue is members of the Diet. So as you can see, Koizumi and Takaichi were the top two vote getters in the first round, and that necessitated a runoff. And in the runoff, Takaichi prevailed, and as you can see, she secured a little bit more support from her fellow Diet members than Koizumi, and really did well with the grassroots of the Liberal Democratic Party. And I think that's probably the story, that Takaichi is a very good communicator. She's very popular on social media, and I think around the country, among conservatives, she's extremely popular, and that played a role in her victory on Saturday.
Kristi, I'd welcome your take on the domestic political environment into which the new Prime Minister will have to operate. What are the likely challenges they will face?
So I think domestically, Takaichi would face three major types of challenges. The first is bridging divisions within her own party. The second is building cooperative relationships with select opposition parties. And then the third is actually addressing the concerns of the Japanese people. So just going through those briefly. First, Takaichi needs to come out of this election and immediately shore up her support within the LDP by bridging divisions and coming up with a strategy for the party to really recover its lost ground. So we expect personnel decisions about key party posts to be announced very soon. And she's already said that she expects to involve everyone of all generations, including her rivals. And so it seems that she's going to pursue a very inclusive strategy. In terms of what the LDP will do next, the fact that Takaichi prevailed seems to signal that the LDP will be moving to the right to recapture its traditional conservative voter base. But there are a number of ways that that could play out concretely in terms of specific policies, so we'll have to see what exactly happens moving forward. Second, Takaichi will have to consider how to navigate relationships with opposition parties. Specifically, the question is about whether to add another party to the LDP Komeito coalition or to continue negotiating on an issue-by-issue basis, as the LDP has been doing for the past year. And Takaichi has already made some comments about the possibility of expanding the coalition, and saying that the new partner would need to agree with the LDP on fundamental issues like constitutional revision, fiscal policy, etc. So there are some different possibilities under discussion at the moment. One promising possibility seems to be a coalition with Isshin no Kai, which is a small conservative party whose key demand would likely to be seeing Osaka designated as a second capital to Tokyo. That's where many of these parties' supporters are located. But even with that, it would be a very complicated set of negotiations and difficult conversations coming in the next couple of weeks. So third, as I mentioned, and most importantly, the next prime minister really must address the concerns of the Japanese people in terms of both long-term vision and short-term results. And economics, unsurprisingly, will be the highest priority. Likely, the Japanese people will like to see some kind of immediate relief in the form of tax cuts, cash handouts, for example. But there also needs to be a plan to revitalize the Japanese economy for the future. So Takaichi is well known for promoting policies that are in the vein of so-called Abenomics, which was a term coined by former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And basically that means loose monetary policy, government spending, and structural reform. But there's some concern that pursuing this kind of policy right now, when Japan is facing inflation, might actually worsen problems, and it might actually exacerbate the weak yen. So basically, the next prime minister has to balance these short-term and long-term considerations.
And Nick, you just published a commentary with your takeaways from the leadership election. Anything you'd like to add?
Sure, I think Kristi summed it up very well. I agree with all that. She referenced former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, so I just wrote about the fact that Takaichi is a protege of Abe, and that maybe she might try to emulate sort of the strategic blueprint he established for Japan. Abenomics, Kristi already mentioned, economic revitalization, investment in new defense capabilities, and then a diplomatic strategy centered on the U.S.-Japan alliance and networking with other like-minded partners in the Indo-Pacific. But as Kristi eloquently described, the political dynamics now are much different. Takaichi has to establish her political footing, she has to deliver on the economy, and that might take some time. But I think it's also important to note that parliamentary elections now need not take place until 2028. So if she is able to establish her footing and start articulating her vision for the country, that's a pretty long runway in which to establish her priorities and, most importantly, explain them to the public. I think the key takeaway from the recent trend line in Japanese politics is that the LDP has really lost the ability to explain their policies and priorities to the people. And Takaichi, with strong convictions and a good social media presence, is well suited to do that. But as Kristi described, very fluid dynamics politically right now, and so we'll just have to see how things play out.
Kristi, you just published a piece about how Japan has responded to the second Trump administration. Does this election change Japan's approach to U.S. foreign policy or general policy more broadly?
Kristi, you're muted.
So the basic direction of Japanese foreign policy is unlikely to change dramatically. Japan continues to face security threats from China, Russia, and North Korea, and the U.S. Remains the key ally for Japan militarily and a close economic partner. So Japan is so far approaching the second Trump administration in much the same way that it did the first Trump administration, which means that specifically it's trying to pursue a dual strategy of close ties with the U.S. and strategic strengthening of other partnerships with other countries to basically try to stabilize its external environment and to potentially fill the diplomatic gaps that are being left by changes in U.S. policy. So on the U.S. side, under Ishiba, we've seen Tokyo put high priority on securing leader-level meetings with President Trump, an intense pursuit of a deal on U.S. tariffs, and moving forward, Takaichi would be likely to continue prioritizing stable relations with the U.S., and we would expect impending discussions about increased burden sharing within the U.S.-Japan alliance and likely ongoing trade and investment discussions. So she would be likely to tackle those head-on and with great intensity. And on the international partnership side, it's likely that the free and open Indo-Pacific vision is likely to remain the overarching framework for Japan's policies. So under Ishiba, we've seen Japan reaching out to regional neighbors such as South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, India, countries in Southeast Asia, for example, as well as bolstering ties with Europe and the global South. And depending on the partners, they've been doing this in security, economics, aid, et cetera. So using different tools and fostering these partnerships in different ways. And again, that would likely continue under Takaichi. Notably, we have not seen Japan seek a fundamentally closer relationship with China since the beginning of the second Trump administration. Folks have noticed that ties have warmed somewhat since Ishiba took office last October, but these have really been relatively modest changes when you look at them, mostly designed to stabilize relations. And there are really serious concerns that remain in Tokyo about Beijing's intentions and actions. So if we consider Takaichi, she's well known for her hawkish stance toward China, much more so than Ishiba. So she might push Japan towards a tougher position, but this would still be in line with the broad trajectory that Japan has already been on. As has been mentioned, like former Prime Minister Abe, Takaichi is a staunch conservative, so she'll also have to find a way to balance appealing to her conservative voter base while also avoiding alienating more centrist voters in other countries. For example, there are some concerns that her views on history could cause tensions with South Korea, which is something that she'll have to navigate. But once a person becomes prime minister, the stakes behind different decisions change, and we'll really have to see how she decides to manage all of these competing interests and considerations moving forward.
Excellent. Any final thoughts from either of you?
Yeah, I'll just build on Kristi's point briefly. I think from the perspective of the U.S. and other partners of Japan, the key is continuity and stability in Japanese politics. So just one last slide to show, if I may, just to sort of demonstrate the challenges that Takaichi might face. There's this pattern in Japanese politics where you have really strong leaders. Koizumi Junichiro, Shinjiro's father, and then Abe's second term, really long, followed by short-term governments. And right now, we've, assuming Takaichi becomes the next prime minister, she'll be the fourth leader since Abe stepped down in 2020. So the question really is she going to get caught in another window of political instability in Japan? Or is she and the conservative wing of the LDP going to turn the tide and reestablish Japan's foothold domestically, but also strategically by elevating Japan's leadership role abroad? And I think, again, that might take some time, but really critical because Japan's strategy is very pragmatic. It's in the interests of the United States, and no doubt she will try to make momentum on foreign policy and domestic policy simultaneously. Kristi, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I can chime in a bit on that as well. I mean, it's clear that the next prime minister of Japan is facing really tough challenges domestically and in terms of international environment. But Nick was mentioning that a lot of folks have concerns that Japan might be re-entering a phase where it sees a new prime minister every year, and this might be a real liability in terms of being able to adapt quickly to U.S. foreign policy and other concerns. But I would just say that, moments of tough challenges are also moments that can define strong leaders. So if we think about Abe's first year back in office, back in 2012 to 2013, he too was facing tremendous challenges related to the economy. At that time, the problem was the strong yen. We just had the 2011 Fukushima earthquake. The LDP had been out of power for several years. So I think if we recall and consider, few would have predicted that at that time he would have gone on to become Japan's longest serving prime minister. And so the situation looks difficult now, but if the next prime minister can offer the Japanese people a vision of the future that inspires some kind of hope, if they can make some concrete progress on economic relief, and if they can adapt quickly to changing dynamics, the new leader could end up being a force for stability. So it's an extremely challenging agenda and a difficult moment, but it's not impossible. So we'll look forward to seeing what happens in the coming days and weeks as we move forward.
Well, thanks to our two panelists, as well as the CSIS Japan Chair team and the streaming and broadcasting team for helping us prepare for this event. And most importantly, thanks to all of you for joining us. To learn more about the Japan Chair, please visit the CSIS website or follow on X and LinkedIn. Goodbye.